Welcome back to Tell Me More Stories Told as podcast. Today, we're taking you back to 1972, to the Munich Olympics. It was supposed to be, a joyous celebration, a global moment of unity, through sport. But as you know, it was tragically overshadowed by an event that would forever change the world, the Munich Massacre.
It's the contrast that's so striking, you see. You have this festive atmosphere. They even nickname them the cheerful games. And then this horrifying event. Imagine if you were there, surrounded by, the excitement of the athletes, and then suddenly this wave of terror just crashes over everything.
It's almost unimaginable, right?
Yeah.
Athletes from everywhere gathered in this spirit of peace and camaraderie. And then just like that, everything changes. And the chilling part is that there were signs, warnings that something like this could happen.
Yeah, that's right. There was this security expert. He actually predicted an attack almost exactly like what happened. He warned that Palestinian terrorists might try to infiltrate the Olympic Village. But, and this is the troubling part, officials ignored these warnings.
Why do you think that was? I mean, how could they just disregard such a clear warning?
It's complex, but I think part of it might have been the mindset at the time. You see, the 72 games were meant to be more relaxed. It was a conscious choice to move away from that heavily militarized vibe of the 1936 Berlin Olympics. They wanted to project this image of openness and peace, maybe even a little naivete about the threats they were facing.
A tragic reminder that sometimes, even with the best intentions, we fail to see the danger. And it wasn't just the security experts' warnings that went ignored. The head of the Israeli delegation, Shmuel Lalkin, he also felt uneasy about the team's lodgings. He even expressed his concerns, but authorities reassured him that everything was under control.
Yeah, these missed signals just make it even more tragic. You can't help but wonder what might have been different if they'd just taken those threats seriously.
Absolutely, the what-ifs are heartbreaking. But let's delve into the events of that morning. September 5th. 8 members of Black September scaled the fence surrounding the Olympic Village.
Black September was a faction of the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization. They were fighting for Palestinian statehood. Black September, though, they were known for their more violent tactics. They were carrying duffel bags filled with weapons and grenades, a clear sign of what they intended to do.
It's terrifying to think about. So they scaled the fence, and then what?
They went into the building where the Israeli athletes were staying, and that's when the horror began. 2 Israelis, Moshe Weinberg, a wrestling coach, and Yosef Romano, a weightlifter, they tried to fight back, but they were overpowered.
Moshe Weinberg's story is incredible. He was forced to lead the terrorists to more hostages, but he fought back several times. He even knocked one attacker unconscious and tried to stab another. He really sacrificed himself trying to protect his team.
He was incredibly brave, facing unimaginable terror like that. And then there's Josef Gutfreund, the wrestling referee. He used his body to barricade a door, holding back the terrorists. That gave some of the athletes time to escape.
Amazing how even in these moments people can act so selflessly. Gutfreund's quick thinking saved lives.
It did. But sadly, not everyone escaped. Josef Romano, the weightlifter, he had tried to fight back earlier. He was shot during the struggle and left to bleed to death.
Another reminder of the brutality of the attackers and the horrific reality that those athletes faced. But amidst all the chaos, there's some amazing stories of survival. One that stands out is the story of race walker Shoal Ladani.
Ladani's story is incredible. He managed to jump from a second-story balcony and run to raise the alarm. What makes his escape even more extraordinary is that he was a survivor of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. To go through such horror twice in one lifetime is unimaginable.
A testament to the strength of the human will to survive. And it's important to note that these acts of bravery weren't limited to the Israeli team. Hong Kong's Olympic team president Arnaldo de Oliveira Sales, he risked his own life to save 2 coaches who were trapped near the Israelis' quarters.
Sales's actions show that even in the darkest moments, compassion can prevail. Heroism can come from anywhere.
These stories of courage are powerful. They remind us that even in the face of evil, there's still hope. And speaking of powerful stories, before we move on to the standoff, let me quickly remind you to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the rest of this deep dive into the Munich Massacre and other captivating episodes right here on Tell Me More. We've got so many more stories to tell, and we wouldn't want you to miss a single one.
Now, as the situation unfolded, Black September, they made their demands. They wanted the release of over 200 prisoners held in Israeli and West German jails, safe passage to an Arab capital. And this is interesting. They also demanded the release of a member of the Japanese Red Army.
Wait, the Japanese Red Army, what were they doing involved in this?
It might seem odd, But the inclusion of Kusuo Okamoto, a Japanese Red Army member who was involved in the Lod Airport massacre a few months earlier, it shows how terrorism was becoming more global at the time. These groups were starting to connect, working together in their acts of violence.
That's a chilling thought, terrorism becoming a global network. So with these demands on the table, how did the world respond?
Well, Israel's response was immediate and firm. No negotiations with terrorists. They believed that negotiating would just lead to more attacks. A tough stance to take when lives are at stake.
It was, and that put the German authorities in a difficult position. What was their approach?
They were in a pressure cooker. They didn't have specialized counterterrorism units at the time, and their efforts were hindered by miscommunication and a lack of clear leadership. It was chaotic, a mix of diplomacy and improvisation. They were desperately trying to find a peaceful solution while the world watched.
The stakes were so high, I can only imagine the tension.
And that tension led to some heartbreaking moments. There's one image that many people remember: fencing coach Andre Spitzer being clubbed in front of the TV cameras while he was trying to answer the officials' questions.
That image is devastating. It shows just how ruthless the terrorists were and how vulnerable the hostages were.
It was a horrific act, meant to intimidate the authorities and the whole world watching.
It's hard to grasp what those hostages must have been going through, knowing their lives were on the line.
Their situation was incredibly dangerous. And unfortunately, the West German response was about to take a turn for the worse. Their initial rescue attempt was full of miscalculations and missed opportunities.
Oh no, what happened?
They tried to disguise police officers in athletic wear, but the terrorists saw right through it because it was all over live TV.
Wait, they broadcast the rescue attempt live? That seems incredibly reckless.
It was a huge mistake. It tipped off the terrorists and the police had to retreat. It shows how little they understood about the role of media in these kinds of situations.
A stark reminder of how much security protocols have changed. We've learned a lot from these past mistakes.
The Munich Massacre was a turning point. The world had to confront the reality of terrorism and the need for more sophisticated responses.
So what happened after the failed rescue attempt? Did the terrorists make any new demands?
They did. They knew the police were coming now.
Oh.
They demanded safe passage to Cairo with the hostages. They wanted a Lufthansa jet waiting for them at Fürstenfeldbruck Air Base.
It sounds like the German authorities were just trying to buy time.
They were desperate to avoid more bloodshed. But their plan was flawed. They thought there were only 5 terrorists, when there were actually 8.
I'm guessing that mistake had terrible consequences.
Sadly, yes. At the airbase, 5 German police officers were tasked with taking down the terrorists. They had rifles, but no special training. They were completely outmatched.
Sounds like an impossible mission.
It was a desperate gamble that backfired. The terrorists saw through the ambush and a shootout started. A German police officer, Anton Fliegerbauer, was killed by a stray bullet. Another innocent life lost.
Those officers were so brave facing those odds.
They were, but they were simply outmatched. The terrorists realized their escape was impossible, so they detonated a grenade inside one of the helicopters, killing all 9 remaining hostages.
I can't imagine the terror they felt in their final moments.
The Munich Massacre was a failure on many levels, from the security to the rescue attempt. It showed how unprepared the world was for this kind of event, and how much we underestimated the threat of terrorism.
And the aftermath. The world must have been in shock.
The world was mourning. The games were suspended for 34 hours. They held a memorial service, and then made the decision to continue the competition.
Continue the games. After such a horrific event.
It was controversial. Some felt it was wrong to continue, while others thought it was an act of defiance against terrorism, a way of showing the spirit of the Olympics couldn't be broken.
Such a difficult decision.
Yeah.
So what happened to the surviving terrorists? Were they brought to justice?
3 were captured, but just a month later they were released, in exchange for a hijacked Lufthansa flight.
Wait, they traded terrorists for hostages on a plane. That seems like a dangerous precedent.
It was highly criticized. Some argued it was necessary to save innocent lives. Others said it was surrendering to terrorism, a sign of weakness that would embolden future attacks.
So many unanswered questions. A legacy of controversy.
Absolutely. And it didn't end there. Israel was furious about the massacre and the release. They launched a covert operation called Operation Wrath of God.
This is where it gets really interesting. Operation Wrath of God was a series of targeted assassinations. They went after the people believed to be responsible for planning and carrying out the Munich attack.
It was a controversial operation. Some saw it as necessary justice, a way of dealing with terrorism when traditional methods couldn't. Others condemned it as extrajudicial killings, a dangerous escalation that blurred the lines between justice and revenge.
And what about Germany's response in the aftermath?
For decades, they were accused of a cover-up, suppressing information about the events and their own failings. It wasn't until 2012 that thousands of documents were finally released. They revealed the mistakes and misjudgments that led to the tragedy.
Decades of secrecy finally broken. It must have been a long wait for the victims' families, seeking answers and accountability.
It was a long road to the truth, but the release of those documents was a significant step towards transparency and acknowledging the past.
This brings up a crucial question. What lessons were learned from Munich? Did it change how the world approached security and counterterrorism?
It had a profound impact on security at sporting events around the world. Countries realized they needed specialized counterterrorism units, better intelligence gathering, and more coordinated responses. It was a wake-up call, a tragic lesson learned.
A sobering reminder that even amidst celebration and unity, evil can strike, and we must be ready.
And that preparedness requires constant vigilance, learning from our past, and working together to prevent these horrors from happening again.
Well said.
Munich really changed how we think about security, especially at these big events like the Olympics.
It's hard to believe something like this could happen at the Olympics, this symbol of global peace. What exactly changed after Munich?
Well, one big change was the creation of those elite counterterrorism units, like GSG-9 in Germany, and other countries followed suit. These units were trained to handle hostage situations and terrorist attacks, with the level of expertise and equipment that they just didn't have in 1972.
Yeah, you need experts to deal with these kinds of threats, not just regular police officers.
Exactly. Munich showed everyone that we need a more coordinated and professional approach to counterterrorism. There were also big changes in airport security, like metal detectors and stricter baggage checks.
We take those for granted now. It's a direct result of what happened in Munich.
Yeah.
Security is always evolving, right?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just about physical security. Intelligence gathering and international cooperation became much more important, too. Munich showed everyone that countries need to share information and work together to prevent these attacks.
It's a global problem that needs a global solution.
Exactly. But even with all the changes, the fight against terrorism never really ends.
What about the families of the victims? Did they ever find justice or closure?
Their journey has been long and difficult. For years, they fought for the German government to acknowledge their failures. They wanted compensation and accountability for the people who planned the attack. They faced a lot of obstacles, but they never gave up.
I can't imagine coping with such a loss, especially with the lack of accountability for so long. They showed incredible strength.
Their resilience is truly remarkable. And while they may never fully heal, they did reach a settlement with the German government in 2004.
That must have been a meaningful moment for them. Finally, some acknowledgement of what happened.
It was a step towards healing. But the wounds of Munich are deep, and the scars will probably remain for a long time.
It's a story that continues to impact us. It makes us reflect on the human cost of terrorism and the importance of never forgetting the victims.
It's also a story of courage, both of the athletes who faced that terror and their families who fought for justice and remembrance.
You know, it's striking how the memory of the Munich Massacre has been preserved, not just in memorials or history books, but in films and literature too.
That's a good point. There have been so many documentaries, films, books about it. Each one offers a different perspective on the event and what happened afterwards. They help keep the memory alive and make sure we don't forget the lessons of Munich.
It's so important to keep talking about these things, to examine the past and learn from it, so we can work towards a future without these tragedies.
Absolutely. Remembering the past is essential, not just to honor the victims, but to understand how complex terrorism is, the challenges in stopping it, and the importance of peace and understanding between nations.
A reminder that peace is something we have to constantly work towards.
Munich is a reminder that peace is fragile, and the consequences of hatred and violence are devastating.
But it's also a reminder of human resilience, the capacity for courage and compassion, even in the face of such darkness.
It's a story that makes us think about our values, our commitment to justice, and our responsibility to create a world where these tragedies don't happen again.
Very well said. The impact is unbelievable. It just keeps echoing, even today.
Yeah, the power of memory, I guess. We have to learn from the past. The Munich Massacre was over 50 years ago, but those lessons are still important today.
Absolutely. It makes you think about, how vulnerable we really are, the complexity of the world, and that terrorism is still a threat.
Yeah, and it shows us, how important it is to keep going.
to find hope even when things are really bad.
Like the victims' families, fighting for justice for so long, the world condemning this act of terrorism. It reminds you that even in the darkest times, we can find the strength to keep going.
It really makes you question things,
Hmm.
like our ideas about security and diplomacy,
Hmm.
even the Olympics.
It definitely shattered that illusion that the Olympics were somehow separate, that they were immune to violence.
No place is truly safe, but we can fight back, learn from these events, and try to build a better future.
And that fight needs more than just security and military force. We need to talk to each other, try to understand each other, and deal with the things that cause conflict.
It's complicated, but we have to try.
Munich was a wake-up call. It showed us that peace is something you have to keep working at, all the time.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Munich Massacre, I'm left wondering, what can we do as individuals to honor the victims and contribute to a more peaceful world?
That's a good question. I think it starts with education, learning about things like Munich, understanding conflict, talking about these issues.
Being informed, being aware, and questioning our own biases.
Exactly. And we need to have empathy. Try to see things from other people's perspectives. We're all human, after all.
Powerful ideas for creating a better world.
Even small acts of kindness and compassion can make a difference. It's like a ripple effect, spreading hope in a world that can feel so negative.
That's a great way to put it. Well, on that note, this brings us to the end of this episode of Tell Me More Stories Told Us podcast. Thanks for joining us on this journey, exploring the Munich Massacre and its impact. We hope you learned something new and are ready to help build a more peaceful world. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our other fascinating episodes. Until next time, keep those minds curious